Maybe I should have taken this book's advice and skipped it. Hey there everyone, Afrodo Reviews here, bringing you another book to determine, is that worth reading over a second breakfast? Or does it deserve the fiery pits of Mount Doom? So let's decide. For those of you wondering what my Santa hat has been for the last few videos, I don't know, I can't find it. Anyways, which sucks because, I mean, look, I even got a little Santa shirt just for this video. So yeah, that's disappointing. But moving on, today's book is Skipping Christmas, written by John Grisham and published on November 6, 2001. It managed to fall into the New York Times bestseller list about a month later on December 9th of that same year, and was adapted into a film release in 2004. However, the title was changed to Christmas with the Kranks. Now, based on my poll that I published a little bit later, most of you guys have seen it, so I'll skip a bit of an explanation on that and move on. Despite both of these facts, the critical response to the book was actually surprisingly low. Here's my report card to prove it. So, with nothing much else to talk about in regards to this book's background, let's move on to the review, specifically of the cover. Now, I actually kind of like this cover. It's very nice, it's simple. It's got a good art style that I really like, and full of focus is the Crank house, which, in comparison to all the other houses around it, which are decorated with light and the frosty snowman, it's blank and barren, creating a sort of dark spot on the Christmas celebrations. Kind of what Grisham's going for. Not that he succeeds, but that's not the point here. Overall, this is a very good cover. However, it's not the only cover of the book, and I've seen several, but that's the one I'm going to focus on for now. But yeah, just in general, the cover of the book is great. Moving on to the story, this is going to be pretty simple. This story is really simple. Basically, Nora and Luther Crank decide that since their daughter Blair just left to go to Peru for the Peace Corps and is going to be gone for about a year, they both decided that maybe this year we'll skip Christmas, save a bit on the financial strain, and we'll go to the Caribbean on a cruise, both to relax from Blair being gone and also to save some money. However, the neighborhood and the community don't like that, and we watch as what should have been a horror book as the suburban community comes out against them, attacking them and trying to intimidate them back into conforming to their ideals, eventually culminating with Luther and Nora having to give in because their daughter Blair decided to return far earlier than normal for Christmas, and they're forced to again give into the conformity so their daughter is happy. That's pretty much it. Honestly, I'm probably over explaining things and making it sound far more interesting than it really is. So, let's just move on to the review. Now, again, I did ask this in a poll, and I asked how many of you had seen The Christmas with the Cranks. Now, for the most part, you overwhelmingly said that you had, but there were a few people who hadn't. And I want to tell you guys this. Christmas with the Cranks is by far one of the most faithful adaptations of any movie I've ever seen onto a screen. And I'm not kidding. It is faithful from what I remember of the movie. There were authors out there who would envy the amount of faithfulness. Like, even the Harry Potter series isn't as faithful as this, and that's a pretty faithful adaptation. It was adapted with such strict adherence to the source material that, honestly, you could watch the movie or read the book, and I would say you've experienced both mediums perfectly. You don't need to do both to experience the story completely. In fact, if I actually had an opinion, I would say watch the movie over reading the book. And this comes from someone who doesn't like the movie very much. Now, let me explain why. There are two reasons why I say you should watch the movie over reading the book. The first, the shift in tone. The Christmas with the Cranks movie is very much a comedy. It's more about the comedic antics of two people trying to skip Christmas and the community not liking the idea and going after them for that.
Please, Luther.
No!
Luther!
We'll come back later.
And Frosty better be here.
Oh, they're gonna come back.
Listen to you.
Because of that comedic sense, there's a certain level of suspension of disbelief that you're able to apply to the project. When it comes to comedies always have a much higher suspension, because you're aware that some things that happen in comedy movies are funny because they're not real. They're not really happening. It's just the idea of it happening that makes it funny. For example, this scene from National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, or this scene from Elf, where a deranged man in an elf costume fights a mall Santa because he's not the real Santa. Both of these scenes in the movie are hilarious. They're both funny. You can laugh at them. But if either of these happened in real life, they would not be nearly as funny. And it's because of that comedic barrier that we're able to point and laugh, say, haha, that's funny. Not, oh my god, that's a terrifying experience to have suffered. It might be funny after the fact, but at the time, that wasn't funny. And because of that, because of the comedic angle, that the much heavier emphasis on comedy in the movie, the events that happen in the movie are much easier to laugh at and accept as happening. Because again, it's a comedy. That when the community comes together to try to intimidate Nora and Luther Crank into celebrating Christmas, even though they've clearly said they don't want to, you can kind of laugh at it, even if it is kind of subtly horrifying. But in this book, the book takes a much more grounded, realistic, and down-to-earth tone. So when you see his neighbors organizing a gigantic caroling session on their lawn that screams so loud that Luther has to go down to the basement to be able to ignore them and read, or that Nora Crank has to turn on the shower so she can't hear him screaming out in the lawn, it's not funny, it's more horrifying. And the problem is, the book isn't saying that's horrifying. Or the scenes where Luther doesn't want to buy the calendar for the police. It comes off a little more believable that the officers have such a reaction to that in the movie, and a lot less horrifying than in the book, where one of the officers literally says he's thinking about hiding, waiting for any reason to pull Luther over so he can arrest him and throw him in jail. I'm sorry, the police abusing their power is not a funny thing for me in a grounded comedic tale. Again, grounded is the word here. That you have to take refuge in audacity at times. And this book doesn't do that. Refuge in audacity, that was the trope I was looking for. That's the name of the trope. People can act sociopathic almost in comedies, and you don't think them a horrible person because it's a comedy. Again, it's a refuge in audacity. Unlike in this book, where Luther is putting up Frosty after his daughter called home, and he falls off the roof only to be saved at the last minute by a tangle of wire around his ankle. You think the neighbor is a sociopathic madman as he laughs as Luther is falling off his roof and about to die, as far as he knows, as opposed to, say, in the movie where they kind of would have laughed after it happened, because, oh wow, it didn't really happen there. And it's just one of those, I don't like anyone in this book because of that. Honestly, I was joking when I put that kind of horror music over my TBR read of this. But it's so fitting when you read this book. Again, because it's so grounded in reality, it comes off much more horrifying than it does in the movie. The second reason I would think is because, and this might be the more important reason to me, but it could vary depending on the two you believe. The second reason is that the movie adds in magic. And I don't mean like metaphorical magic, I mean actual magic. The movie ends with implying that this mall Santa who's been following Luther around is actually Santa. And the reason that works is because it adds a sense of whimsy and belief to the movie. It wasn't done well, don't get me wrong. Again, I don't like Christmas with the Kranks very much. But it does add that sense of whimsy and magic to the world, now metaphorical, that the book lacks. The book wants to be more grounded. It wants to be based in reality, but without that magic, all the things that are happening don't have that sense of whimsy to them. It's not like Christmas Carol, where if that was based in reality and it was just three people breaking into an old miser's house and scaring the crap out of him until he agrees to be more charitable, it would probably be far less of a whimsical and interesting tale as with the ghosts. You get what I mean? If that makes sense. And also, because of its down-to-earth and realistic tone, this book is very boring. Like, boring. I don't know how to stress enough how boring this book is. This book is 177 pages, and it feels overwritten somehow. It feels like entire chapters are just there for padding. The first half of the book, Luther and Nora Krank are kind of just doing random things to prepare for their trip, while occasionally dealing with their neighbors sitting outside and screaming at them to go out and celebrate Christmas. Preparing for the trip isn't interesting, and the neighbors' antics to get them to celebrate Christmas isn't focused on enough to be an actual plot point until the end. The second half is definitely more interesting, but it also tries to adopt a slapstick comedy in a sort of Diet Water National Lampoon kind of style. No offense, I don't think slapstick works as well on written page as it does in a visual medium, to be perfectly honest with you. So it doesn't, again, because of its realistic tone, it doesn't work. Also, I'm going to put it out there, this book took me heavily off guard with just 2 sentences, and I did not realize that the book was this racist. 2 sentences is all it took for me to say, wow, that's racist. These are the 2. The worst part about this is there's no direct or indirect condemnation of this belief. In fact, that second sentence almost seems to enforce it. Oh, he's Peruvian, but at least he's not a dark-skinned Peruvian. That's much more acceptable. And it's just like, is this the Kranks' belief? Is this the author's belief? Neither are good, but one is worse than the other, and I don't know which one it is. Like, for something that tries to make me spin the whole book sympathizing with the Kranks, to drop that on me at the last second, I hate them now. All in all, I'd give this book a 5 out of 10. I mean, what more is there to say about this book, really? It's a boring mess. It doesn't really do anything. Honestly, I think the point of the story was to condemn trying to skip Christmas. But at the same time, the way it's written, I can't help but side with Luther as he digs in his heels as he constantly meets backlash against trying to skip Christmas. And it's just one of those, he gets so much flack for it, I can't help but sympathize with the fact that, hey, he's an adult. He can do whatever the hell he wants. Stop attacking him. Grisham tries to do a diet version of slapstick comedy at the end, and he tries to do a whimsical Christmas tale, but tries to do it in such a grounded and realistic tone that it doesn't work, and just gives a lot of unfortunate, subtle, horrifying implications about several things. This book could just as easily be read as a horror story. You can't escape suburban conformity, and trying will only be met with disaster, as even the universe itself seems to work against you. The question of whether it deserves Mount Doom is very strong, but in the end, I'm gonna have to say yes. And simply because I just personally don't think there's any reason to read this book. The movie is the superior version if you have to enjoy it, but really not a tale worth reading, to be completely honest. It doesn't say anything. And what it does say, I don't agree with. I don't think anyone should agree with. So, with that, it goes into Mount Doom. Personally, for me, it's not a bad book. It's just not a book worth reading. With that, remember, with every book comes an adventure. And every adventure is worth having. Even the bad ones. Happy belated Christmas, y'all.